Queen Elizabeth II laid to rest in a sombre ceremony watched by hundreds of millions of people. Qantas insists it's much better prepared ahead of the upcoming school holidays, having hired 1,500 staff. And President Joe Biden says the US will fight for Taiwan if it's invaded by China. It's Tuesday, the 20th of September, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Did you watch the funeral last night?
I did. How could you not?
Yeah.
Quite an incredible spectacle. And I thought it was a fitting farewell. It was a bit of a celebration as well. It wasn't totally sombre. It was a celebration and kind of just to see that in my lifetime is kind of quite remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. It was the kind of thing that you really kind of had to watch, I think.
Yeah.
And it was certainly worthwhile. And just it is kind of a spectacle, isn't it? The Brits certainly do ceremony very, very well. And in such a significant one as this, they kind of really did it perfectly.
They just do royalty better than anyone else, I reckon.
That is a very good point. We'll have a little bit more of a chat about that in a moment, but just wanted to mention that you've got an interview coming up today with Andrew Hunter from QEII Australia. Really quite a broad-ranging chat about the state of business in Australia.
Exactly right. I suppose if there was a focus, it was really how small business is performing. And of course, CPAs provide accountants and advisors for sort of tens of thousands of small businesses across the country. So Andrew is very tapped into that. It's a really interesting chat.
Yeah, no, it's a good one, particularly because, as you say, they're the ones with their ears to the ground.
Yeah, which is an interesting concept.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will leave that image with you for a moment. The funeral, as we mentioned, is really the main story this morning, with Queen Elizabeth II laid to rest. The ceremony was both kind of full of pomp and pageantry, while still being respectful, I thought, to the former monarch.
It was a fitting farewell to a queen who had ruled over her empire for 70 years. It's expected to have been the most watched television event in history and one of the largest gatherings of national leaders ever. The service was conducted by the Dean of Windsor, the spiritual head of St George's Chapel in Windsor. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and 10 everyday Australians were there among 2,000 mourners. The last post I thought was poignant, and it was hard not to feel something when the British national anthem was sung or as the 2-minute silence was observed. Now, a private burial service was due to be held for the royal family at 4:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time this morning.
And Sean, as you mentioned, it was one of the largest gatherings of world leaders ever. And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese really used his time in the UK to meet with other dignitaries.
Yes, although officially it wasn't a time for bilateral talks and certainly not for UK Prime Minister Liz Truss. Now, having said that, she did meet Anthony Albanese. He also met the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Ahead of the funeral, Mr Albanese said his meeting with King Charles III was focused on expressing Australia's condolences and there were no Republic talks. He added he was surprised by the King's energy levels during the meeting, given his gruelling schedule. Now, Mr Albanese is expected back in Australia in the next 24 hours or so.
All right. Now, moving on from the funeral, back to local markets, Sean. How did everything fare yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.3% yesterday to 6,720. Like in other equity markets, investors are really waiting to see what the central banks of the US, UK and Japan do on interest rates this week. There wasn't a lot going on. The big banks were mixed, so too the big iron ore miners, while the energy companies were lower. Wesfarmers was an outperformer, up 1.4%, while software group WiseTech Global jumped 1.7%, and gold digger Newcrest rose 1.8%. Computer share was among the worst, down nearly 4%. Now, best on the day was lithium producer Lake Resources, which jumped 13%. Sounds good, but it fell 20% last week. Worst was another lithium company, Sayona Mining. Mind you, generally the lithium and gold companies did pretty well yesterday. It's a really big week for dividend payouts here in Australia. BHP will give more than $12.5 billion back to shareholders on Thursday. Thanks to its massive final dividend, Rio Tinto will hand out $1.4 billion on the same day. Also on Thursday, Telstra will share around nearly $1 billion amongst its shareholders. Great week for people relying on dividend payments.
Yeah, it certainly is a big week. And just briefly, what's happening in international markets?
Brent crude fell back a bit to be trading around $91 a barrel. Gold's at $16.70 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is back down under 67 US cents.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there is plenty of property news around at the moment, and it kind of ranges really from dire predictions of house price collapses right through to warnings about robots replacing workers.
I have this theory that property is full of more characters than any other sector. I don't know whether it's right or not, but like the Financial Review.
Yeah,
no?
I reckon, yes, yeah, you're probably right. If we add in the gaming sector, the gambling sector.
Oh, yeah, although I think, yes. I mean, I don't want to say anything untoward about anyone. I'd just say the property people, generally they're very nice people, very honest people, and full of love a good yarn. That's what I'd say.
Well, especially if they're ranging from house price collapses to robots replacing workers.
That's right. Well, look, the Financial Review is holding its annual property summit. There's plenty of speakers from economists to investment bankers and asset managers. One to grab the headlines yesterday was Barrenjoey chief economist Jo Masters. Jo's been on our show quite a few times, really. She said if the Reserve Bank lifts interest rates to the level the market expects, the economy will fall into recession, and she expects house prices in Sydney to fall 25% and 16% nationwide. That would be quite a collapse. Others were much more sanguine. Credit Suisse Australia's investment banking co-head Angelo Cesera said households have buffers in place and can withstand rising mortgage and rent payments until inflation returns to normal. Mr. Cesera also said asset prices at Australia's 10 largest real estate investment trusts, REITs, which we all own in our super funds, asset prices have dropped nearly $20 billion or 15% so far this year. REITs don't do well when interest rates rise. That's the bottom line to that one. He said that has set the scene for a tug of war between buyers and sellers. Charter Hall CEO David Harrison, whose company owns plenty of office space, said activity-based working is dead and office densities would increase from the current 12 to 13 square metres per person back to pre-pandemic levels of 10 square metres per person. He said workers need to decide if they want a career or a job, adding that if people kept working from home, they'd increasingly find their roles replaced by robots. But Stockland CEO Tarun Gupta said flexible working is here to stay and will cut demand for office space. The boss of Vicinity Centres, Grant Kelly, said the resurgence in large-scale shopping centres is being underpinned by a boom in luxury shopping. And the Reserve Bank's Jonathan Kearns said potential home buyers are able to borrow 20% less than before cash rates began rising. Plenty for the property lovers yesterday.
Yeah, that's a massive day. I don't quite see the link between people choosing to work from home, and therefore their roles are going to be replaced by robots.
Yes, I totally agree. I don't quite understand what Mr. Harrison was talking about.
Makes for a good headline though, doesn't it?
It does.
All right, moving on. The federal government yesterday announced it will spend $1.4 billion to extend Australia's COVID-19 response measures through to the end of the year.
This is money for measures that were due to expire at the end of the month. There's an extra $840 million for aged care support, $115 million for the supply of rapid antigen tests to service providers and care recipients in high-risk settings, $142 million in rebates for COVID testing, and $235 million for PPE treatments, RATs, and other supplies for aged care, primary care, disability care, and First National Health Services. I think it's a wise spend of money.
Yeah, I think so. Now, Sean, if you think we're paying more tax than ever before, you might well be right. However, most of the extra, it seems, is actually being paid by the big miners.
Yeah, so tax payments as a share of the economy have hit a 16-year high and could beat the former coalition government's tax cap after record mining and energy profits and also a boom in jobs, delivering a multi-billion-dollar windfall to the federal budget. Now, of course, when more people have jobs, more income tax is paid. Federal tax collections are estimated by budget economist Chris Richardson to be about 24% of gross domestic product for the recently completed 2021-2022 financial year, according to the Financial Review. That would be above the 23.7% of GDP recorded back in the 2008 financial year. That will certainly help reduce the budget deficit for the last financial year. That's very good news. But in the medium to longer term, deficits remain a structural problem for the economy. It's something Reserve Bank boss Philip Lowe highlighted late last week. He hoped politicians will confront a combination of tax rises, spending cuts and/or productivity-boosting reforms to help grow the economy. In any case, between low unemployment and massive commodity prices, the government's getting more tax take than ever before.
Okay. Now, Sean, with only days now before the school holidays beginning in many parts of the country, Qantas is proactively calling on passengers to get to the airport early. They must have learned something from last time, perhaps.
That's right. You might as well get ahead of the curve, I think. The national carrier said flight delays, cancellations and mishandled bag rates have fallen in the first week of September, and 70% of flights ran on time in the first fortnight of the month. Now, that's a big improvement from July, where that on-time rate was 52%. There's also been fewer cancelled flights. Now, the reason? Simple, more staff. Qantas said it had hired an additional 1,500 staff in cabin crew, customer service and engineering, while baggage handling suppliers had boosted their workforce by 25%. Now, this coming weekend is going to be a big test for Qantas and, of course, the other carriers. We have a 4-day weekend in Victoria. We've got the AFL football finals. We've got the beginning of the school holidays in some states. We'll see what we're saying next Monday, whether the good news continues.
Yeah, it should certainly help, though, that the COVID numbers are coming back down, so there'll be fewer staff in isolation then as well. I know that we don't really give advice on this podcast, but having travelled internationally recently, can I give you the best tip for getting through airport security quickly?
Please.
Find yourself some small children from somewhere.
Ah, yes.
Because you just get straight into those fast-track queues for people that need special assistance or with small children. And so if you've got some kids...
And pinch them. So what I have found when I travelled with kids, make sure they misbehave.
Oh, pinch them as in like physically pinch. I thought you meant take them from somewhere. This is getting into very, very risky areas here, Sean.
No, we're not advising that. We're just advising to pinch your own children, which probably isn't what we should advise anyway. But the more misbehaved they are, the more likely you're going to get special treatment.
Oh, that's right. Just to get you moving through there and get you away from the security area. Look, I completely agree, but I think it's probably wise that we move on rather quickly from this one. Sean, Origin Energy is going to sell its stake in a Northern Territory gas field sorry, I can't get over you pinching children. Anyway, this is part of Origin looking to accelerate its push into renewable energy.
That's right. It wants to divest its interest in the Beetaloo Basin, 600 kilometres south of Darwin, and is considering exiting all its upstream exploration permits. Now, these permits allow a company to undertake geological surveys, obtain land rights and some production activities. It's kind of the beginning of the process. The exception, though, as far as Origin's concerned, is the massive Australia Pacific LNG project in Queensland. It will remain part of that. Origin Chief Executive Frank Calabria said while gas will have an important role in the business, divesting upstream exploration permits enables greater flexibility around the allocation of capital to cleaner energy. Origin's already brought forward the closure of its only coal-fired power plant, the Araring station in New South Wales, to 2025. It sounds like it's pretty serious about cleaner fuels.
Yeah, and in the same sector, across at AGL Energy, there's been a fair bit of management change happening.
Ever since the collapse of its demerger plan in late May, big changes have been expected. Now, Chief Executive Graham Hunt will finish up at the end of the month as the search for a permanent replacement continues, and Chair Peter Botten will also step down, replaced by Patricia McKenzie.
Okay, now, Sean, it seems like we've been talking about this one for a very long time now, but share registry company Link Group has rejected a new proposal from bidder Dye & Durham, which included deferring part of the payment.
Yeah, I'm almost over this one, I've got to say. Anyway.
It's been months, hasn't it? It has been months and months that we've been discussing this.
The revised offer came after the UK's Financial Conduct Authority said it would only approve the $2.5 billion acquisition by Dye & Durham if £306 million were set aside to meet potential penalties and payouts related to the role of Link's UK unit. Now, that unit, Link Fund Solutions, oversaw funds run by fallen financial wizard Neil Woodford. Toronto-listed Dye & Durham had agreed to pay $4.81 a share, but over the weekend said it would pay Link shareholders the equivalent of $3.81 per share in cash up front and would defer the remaining $1 for as long as 2 years to meet potential payouts relating to the Woodford funds. Link's share price fell more than 2% yesterday. It's now at its lowest in 3 months. The board's rejected this latest offer Who knows? That's all I can say. Who knows?
I'm sure we'll be talking about it for some time to come. Finally, Sean, Australia and Indonesia have agreed to increase economic cooperation.
We tend to forget about Indonesia, but it is such a massive market and it's developing and it's right on our doorstep, much closer than China or Japan or any of those places where we sell commodities. Treasurer Jim Chalmers yesterday met his Indonesian counterpart to sign a memorandum of understanding. The agreement will facilitate the exchange of department officials from both nations with dialogue and cooperation to focus on areas such as tax policy and financial regulation. Now, clean energy, climate financing and pension systems were also discussed. Mr. Chalmers also flagged facilitating further investment from Australia's $3.4 trillion superannuation pool into Indonesia.
Right, moving on to overseas news. Now, I mentioned this one at the top of the show. In his most strident statement so far, US President Joe Biden has said that the US would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Up until the interview on CBS's 60 Minutes on Sunday night US time, Washington has been deliberately unclear on whether it would respond militarily to an attack on Taiwan. But the president was pretty clear when asked if the US would defend Taiwan. He said, yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack. Now, in recent months, China, of course, has been more aggressive in the region and certainly sounding as if it was considering using military force on Taiwan. It claims the island to be part of the mainland. Now we are really setting ourselves up for a US versus China scenario.
Yeah, not a good situation. Sean, final story. In Japan, we mentioned this yesterday, one of the strongest typhoons in decades has hit the south of the country, although its effect was felt right across the nation.
Yeah, and we're still really calculating how much damage has been done. The typhoon brought torrential rainfall and the risk of landslides. More than 8 million people had been ordered to evacuate and seek shelter from the storm, which dumped more than half a metre of rain in some areas. Winds hit 175 kilometres an hour, causing heavy waves. The storm's thought to be the worst to ever have hit Japan, certainly in recorded history.
Wow, okay. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. And your guest today is Andrew Hunter, the Chief Executive Officer of CPA Australia.
Yes, lovely fella, Andrew. We talk all about, well, mostly about small businesses, as we said at the top of the show. CPA Australia is such an important organisation and its members are such important players in the economy, particularly with small businesses. CPA Australia, though, is sort of building itself out to work with more medium and large-sized businesses as well.
All right, it's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 20th of September, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you haven't already, have a go at listening to us through your smart speaker. Just say, play the Fear and Greed podcast, and theoretically, it should just start playing. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.